Okay, so we have learned everything we can learn about pronouns. Now we're going to parse pronouns in sentences. Basically, what that means is we're taking everything we learned about pronouns, their qualities, their characteristics. So, are they interrogative? Are they personal? And their properties, which remember is gender, number, person, and case. George never plucks chickens. We're taking all that information we've been learning and we're putting it into a chart based on what we find in a sentence. And this includes cases. Remember, Latin has more cases than English because English decided to condense some of the cases of Latin into one whole group, the objective case. So in English, we have the nominative or naming case, which means it's telling you what the subject is. It's the name or what the sentence is about. We have the genitive or possessive case, which is basically telling us that those are the things that show ownership, so things we possess. And then we have the objective cases. Those are nouns that are in the objects of phrases or sentences. We have object of the preposition, direct objects, and indirect objects. The other thing we have to remember before we get started is when we're talking about cases, we're looking at the job that the word's doing in the sentence. And in order to make that easier, we have to remember that there are only 5 main patterns of sentence structure in the English language. And we've been going over and over that, but let's just review real quick. The first one is subject, noun, verb. The second one, say it with me if you want to, subject, noun, verb, direct object. The third one, subject, noun, verb, indirect object, direct object. All of these are our transitive verbs. The last 2 patterns in English deal with our linking verbs, are intransitive, so they don't transfer action over to an object like here. Okay? And that is our subject, noun, verb, predicate, nominative, or some people call it the subject complement. In other words, it's another name for this subject. So the teacher is she. She is the teacher. Okay? So this is our linking verb. And our 5th and final pattern is instead of a predicate nominative, we have a predicate adjective. So it's not renaming the subject, it's describing the subject. Okay? So those are our sentence patterns in English. That's all we have to remember. And so when we attack sentences, it would really help us if we listed those as on a note card and then looked and see if we could find what pattern that sentence is in. Okay, just a little background before we get started. Let me get this gone. Or sort of gone. I'm learning how to use this system, so it takes me just a minute. Okay, so quick review of the types of pronouns we've learned. We've learned personal pronouns, possessive pronouns, relative pronouns. Those are the ones that introduce a dependent clause. Clause meaning that it's dependent. It can't sit by itself, but nonetheless, it has a subject and a verb as well. And usually those dependent clauses where relative pronouns start them, they're usually acting as one whole unit. Think of them just like one word, Okay, so they're a group of words that are acting like one word, basically, and I'll explain that further. Interrogative pronouns are another type we've learned. We've also learned demonstrative, we've learned reflexive. Today we're going to focus on personal, possessive, relative, and interrogative, what I call our four main pronouns, the ones that we use the most in the English language. So, personal pronouns in the nominative case, nominative meaning subject, and I've grouped them here on the board, and as you can see, the top is the singular, and the bottom is the plural. I, you, he, she, it, we. Again, you can be either singular or plural, so it's stated twice, and they. Okay? The next case is the genitive case. You can see that in the red. Genitive meaning ownership or possession. And we're going a little different in this organization. Not only are we talking about singular and plural, but we're also talking about first person, second person, third person. And real quick, just to recap, first person means somebody's doing the talking directly in that sentence. The second person means somebody's being talked to in that sentence. So we usually use you. And the third person means somebody's being talked about. And that's where we use in pronouns the he and the she. Okay, so for the possessive pronouns in the genitive, the personal pronouns in the genitive case showing possession is my, mine, and our. Our, of course, is plural. Your, yourself, yourselves would be the plural. And in the third person, his and her, its, and then the plural would be their. You can set up a little chart like I've shown here for each of the pronoun types. And Harvey Grammar, if anybody's familiar with that, it's free online. Harvey's Elementary Grammar has those under declensions where they've declined them by case, by number, and by person. And the more we get familiar with that, the easier it's going to be not to get fooled in our own writing or in taking those all-important standardized tests. Personal pronouns in the objective case, meaning they sit in those objects of the prepositions. They sit in the direct object. Me, us, myself, singular, is me, myself, and then plural in the first is us and ourselves. In the second, you have you, him, her, it, and them are in the third, and himself, herself, itself, themselves. Now, why I put this at the bottom, himself, herself, itself, and themselves, is it's one of those unique things that it can be in the third, but it can also be in the first person. Okay, so now that we know all that, when we get a sentence and we're going to parse or just lay out in a clear chart the main things we know about the pronouns, the first thing we have to do is remember the 6 steps. Identify, define, classify, properties, the role, and then one thing I don't have on here are the mechanics and cautions. So to identify, we just identify the pronoun and put it up in the chart that's in the sentence. Then we apply the definition. Does the word stand in for a noun? So we make sure. So we answer what kind, and in this case we're just going to do personal, and we make sure that it can stand in for a noun. Okay? Once we can do that, then we classify it under the question kind. And then we go through and tell the properties, gender, person, number, and case. Now, I have broken up gender, person, number, and case separately because we're also going to add in here decline just to make sure we're really getting and knowing those pronouns because they're hard. There's a lot to remember. So here we go. Let's try to apply this. I see them coming up the street. You notice I went ahead and highlighted the personal pronouns in that sentence. So let's start with the first one. We identify the pronoun I. I replaces a noun. So instead of saying Stacy, we say I. Okay? What kind is it? Well, it's personal. We'll put it right here for personal. Now the next column is the antecedent or subsequent. Ante meaning before. So what comes before the pronoun that the pronoun is referring to? Now sometimes what the pronoun is referring to comes subsequent or after the pronoun. So whichever one that it is occurring, that's where we're going to put in this column. So for this one, the antecedent is the unstated name of the speaker or person talking. Okay? Now we go to our properties. George never plucks chickens. Gender. So in this case, we're not sure because I could be masculine or feminine. We don't know specifically who I is, so we will leave that as a dash line. Person. Obviously, I is in first person if we remember our declension. And I, of course, in number is only referring to one person. It's singular. Now, case. Case, we have to go back to the sentence and find out what job the pronoun is doing in that sentence. So to do that, we classify the sentence. Now, just to be brief, we're only going to classify what we need to parse and identify these personal pronouns. Notice that up the street we know is a prepositional phrase and doesn't have anything to do with our sentence, and coming is being used, a verb being used as an adjective, and again doesn't have anything to do with our personal pronouns. So we will ignore those when we classify, and we'll just classify the core sentence up here where the pronouns exist. I see them. Who sees them? I. And let me change my color here just to make it look better. Subject, pronoun. What is being said about I? I see, verb. I see who, them. Is them the same thing as I? No, it's not. So it is the direct object. So now we know what case, because I is in the subject, naming, or what is the fancy word we use? Nominative. Okay? So what we're going to decline here is we're going to decline the first person nominative pronouns. Singular we know as I. And what would be plural? Instead of I, it would be we. Okay? We'll quickly do the next one. We already know the case. I'm going to go ahead and put it over there. It is a direct object, so it's in the objective case. We know it's the pronoun them. We know it's a personal pronoun. Who is it referring to? Them is referring to the understood name of the people spoken of. We don't exactly know who the names of the people are, but we know that them is grouping and taking the place instead of us listing everybody in that group. Okay? So name, spoken of. Okay? Now let's go into the properties. Gender. Well, it could be multiple, so we don't know. Person, third, and number, more than one, plural. So if we decline this, we are declining the third person objective case. Third person singular, him in the objective case, her, and it. And of course the plural is the one we're using now, them. Okay? So we basically, all that information we've had in multiple pages and notes, we're attacking a sentence and finding out all that information and then putting it in a nice, easy chart. Possessive pronouns, just a reminder, mine, his, hers, ours, yours, theirs. Singular and plural. And remember, possessive shows ownership. So, that book is mine. Whose is mine? The book. Subject, noun. What is being said about the book? The book is, intransitive or linking verb. It is what? So now we know it's either going to complement or it's going to modify. So it's a predicate nominative, and it is a special kind of predicate. Wanted to write that a little smaller. It's giving more information or complementing the subject, book. It's telling us exactly whose book it is. It's mine. Now, book. We go to the noun. What kind of book? Which book? That book. So that in this sentence is being used as an adjective to modify book. The reason why we classified that whole thing is because that's one of those overused words in English, and sometimes it's a pronoun and sometimes it's not. So we needed to make sure that it wasn't being used as a pronoun. So the only possessive pronoun we have in here is mine. So that's the only one we're going to parse. So the pronoun is mine. We know it's in the predicate or nominative case. So what kind is it? We know it's possessive. It's showing ownership. And it's referring to the book. Remember, it's complementing it. So it's the antecedent of this pronoun, again, is the book. Gender, it's not masculine, it's not feminine, it's neutral or neuter. Oops, that looks like an F there. Okay, so person, excuse me. It's the thing we're talking about, so it's third person. And number, we're only talking about one book. Now, the other thing I wanted to say about the antecedent, when it's possession, not only is it referring to the object, but it's also referring to the one who owns the object. Okay? All right, so we're going to now decline all of the nominative case third person pronouns. Third person is who's being talked about. So singular would be he, she, and it, because we're talking about it in the nominative or subject case. And then plural would be they. Sorry, I lost my brain there. Just a minute. We don't decline because mine, his, hers, ours, yours, and theirs. There is no difference in terms of the case that it's in. We'd still use those words in any of them. So we don't need to decline them. Sorry, I got a little ahead of myself there. Okay, relative pronouns. Remember the trick about relative pronouns. Relative pronouns introduce a dependent clause. Relative pronouns are who, which, what, and that, and also whom. That, let's look at this one's a little tricky. That is relative. Remember, it can be used and overused in English. So how we determine if it's being used as a relative pronoun. It's a relative pronoun when who, which, or whom can be used in its place. Okay? And the other thing is some relative pronouns not only connect clauses as their main job. Remember, a clause has both a subject noun and the verb, but it's not the main one. It's the dependent clause. Okay? So some of these pronouns, these relative pronouns, they not only do that job of connecting clauses, but they also comprise themselves or are built into themselves both the antecedent, what they're referring to, which is usually pretty non-specific, and the relative pronoun itself. And I'll show you that in an example here. Let's use this sentence. I remember what you said. Let's go ahead and classify this. I remember what you said. Who remembers what you said? I. Subject pronoun. What is being said about I? I remember. Verb. Remember what? Oh, I remember what you said. So it's the clause. Let's check. Here's a pronoun. It could be relative. It can only be relative if it's followed by a subject noun and a verb. Who said? You. Subject pronoun. What is being said about you? Well, you said. Verb. So this, you said what? Oh, that which you said or what you said. Okay? The tricky part about what is it's one of those that are built, the antecedents built in, and what in this sentence really is answering the object, which is that which. So all you have to remember is if you can break it apart to that which, and the sentence makes sense. So I remember that which you said. Obviously that makes sense. So what is definitely the relative pronoun. So this is the one we're going to parse. Now what is what? Remember I asked, said what? Well, they're not telling us specifically, they're just saying that which you said. Okay, they're not telling us exactly what they said, they're just saying, you know, that thing. So, thing, it's an object, and it's not the same as you, so it is the direct object. So, what is the pronoun? What kind is it? Well, it's starting a clause, so it's a relative pronoun, and it's referring to that. And which. So that is kind of modifying which, if you will. So we'll put which in there. The gender, it's neither masculine or feminine, so it's neuter or neutral. It's what we're talking about, so the person is third. And it's just one thing we're talking about, so it's singular. Okay, and we've determined that it's a direct object, so it's in the objective case. Okay, and when we are looking at relative pronouns, what else do we have in the objective third person? We have, that's when we use whom, singularly, instead of who. That's that one we get all messed up on, especially in the South, and in English in general. We really struggle with that. And which as we see, is what we used, built into the word what. I know, first time getting a hold of this, it's a little fuzzy, but the more you practice them, the easier it'll get. The last ones we're going to look at today is interrogative pronouns. Just like the type of sentence is interrogative, it's a question sentence. Therefore, it needs a pronoun that asks a question. The thing about question sentences is that typically they're an inverted or not natural sentence. Let me tell you what that means. Syntax, or the sentence structure or construction in English, our base pattern is subject, noun, verb, object. Many languages use this base pattern as their or main pattern in their language system. Some, like Swahili, they reverse it, where they'll have the verb, the object, and then the subject, noun, or the object, subject, noun, and verb. So in the English language, our base or primary or natural ordered sentence pattern is we start with our subject, noun, then we go straight to our action, what the subject's doing, and then what it's doing, what action it's doing upon an object. That's our basic pattern. But when we ask a question, we invert many times this pattern. When you see a pronoun that is asking a question, typically you know it's an inverted sentence. So it's easier to understand the roles and jobs the words are doing if you can put it back in its natural order. So we can switch this, and notice we have a response here just so we know who they're talking about. So the sentence is, "What is that man?" And somebody answered, "A lawyer." So we know what the man is. We've given just the response, but we're going to focus on this sentence here. How would we put this sentence in natural order? Well, let's start with what they're talking about. Who are they talking about? They're talking about that man. Okay? So that man, and what are they saying about that man? He is, and then he is what? Okay, now we're ready to classify. Who is what? And let me change my pen color just to make it easier for us to see. Who is what? Man. What is being said about man? Man is. Okay? He's not doing action. He is in a state of being. He is. Okay? He is what? Well, notice, remember, we were able to switch these. So what is really complimenting the man? So it is a predicate nominative. Which man? So remember, adjectives modify nouns, and they answer the questions what kind, which one, how many. Which man? That man. Okay, so now we're ready to decline our interrogative pronoun. We know the pronoun is, oh, I didn't mean to do blue. It's kind of hard to see, isn't it? We know the pronoun is what. And since we've classified it, we know that it's in, whoops, let's try that again. We know it's in the nominative case. And we know it's an interrogative. And we know it's referring to, or its antecedent is man. We know the properties of a pronoun. Remember, a pronoun takes the place of a noun. So the antecedent will tell us a lot about the property of the pronoun. The gender in this case, since they're referring to a man, then is masculine. The person, it's who they're talking about. So that means third person. And the number, they're only talking about one man, that's singular. And we don't need to worry about the declensions right now. Okay, we'll finish up with a really tough one taken from the Scarlet Letter. And I'll show you kind of how to break it down so that it doesn't seem so complicated. Remember, there's 5 basic sentence patterns in English. So if we can figure out the basic sentence pattern, then it'll be a lot easier for us. All right, so we're just looking at pronouns. And I've underlined the pronouns that are obvious in there. His, she, him, and his again. Now, this sentence is inverted, meaning the subject, they've put part of the predicate at his arrival at the beginning of the sentence to give it interest. So we have to know that at his arrival is in really the predicate part of the sentence when it's in natural order. So we kind of have to attack it with that in mind. So we know the subject and the verb's not, the main subject and verb is not in the front of this sentence. We also know that and is either a compound or a coordinating conjunction. Well, we see that there's a comma and. So they're adding additional information. Now let's see if there is a clause within that after and, then we know we have a clause. Sometimes is telling us when, so it's got to be an adverb. It's modifying the action, telling us when that action occurred. So is before. She saw him. What is being said about she? She saw. Who saw? She saw. So we have a clause right there. And then we have a comma for pausing, and we start with the stranger. Okay? And then we notice the stranger was him, and so it must have been his arrival. So at his arrival goes to the stranger. The stranger had bent his eyes on Hester. Okay, so let's attack this real quick. We know that at his arrival is a prepositional phrase, so we put the red bracket around it. And we know that P is a preposition because it's followed by a noun. At what? Arrival. Whose arrival? His. So we know that our pronoun his is going to be in the possessive case and it's being used as an adjective. The other pronoun we found is she. So we know, we put the red brackets there, that this is a clause within or before the main part of the sentence that's underlined in green. So in this, she, we know, is being used in the subject or nominative case. Him, then, is who the action is going to. It's who she saw. Direct object. And lastly, his, he had bent what? Bent eyes. Direct object. Well, whose eyes? His eyes. So we know that that pronoun is a possessive pronoun. So now we can begin to parse this. Let's start at the beginning with his. We know it's the pronoun. We already said it's in a prepositional phrase and it's giving ownership of the arrival. So it is in the genitive or possessive case. So we know it is a possessive pronoun. And who is it referring to? What is its antecedent? Well, because it's out of order, if it was in the proper order, what would come before that would be the stranger. So stranger is what his is referring to. Gender then is masculine. Person, it's who we're talking about, third. And number, we're only talking about one, singular. Okay? So our declensions for the genitive case in third person is what? Obviously, in singular, it's his. And the opposite of a his is a hers. So a her. And if it's not a he or a she, it's an it's. And if it's more than one, it's theirs, right? T-H-E-I-R, there. And we could also say, well, no, we can't. Okay, so we're done with that. The next one we have is she. The pronoun is she. It's in that clause, so we know it's in the nominative or subject case. So we know it's a personal pronoun. And it's referring to who? Who is the subsequent? Because there's nothing in the front that's telling us anything about a she. So it's not ante before, it's subsequent after. She is referring then to who he laid his eyes on, which was on Hester. Okay? Gender then is feminine. And we are talking about someone, third person. Of course, we're only talking about one someone, so it's singular. And so our declension of personal pronouns in the nominative case would be I, we, it would be, oh, but we're doing third person, so let me back up. Let's just do third person. Third person, nominative case, it would be the one we used, she, and of course the opposite of a she is a he, and then an it, and the plural of that would be they. Okay, last one here. I'm not drawing a very straight line. We have two more, so I may have to erase some of this. Him, she saw him. Notice that we've already noted that him is in the direct object. The action is being transferred onto him by she. So, direct object, him, so the case is the objective case, right? Okay, what kind is it? It's personal. In the object case. Who is it referring to? Stranger again. And we know that him is just like up above. It is masculine, it is third, and it is singular. Just because we're getting low on space and time, let's jump to his. His, of course, is the pronoun. It shows possession. His what? His eyes, right? It is referring to the stranger. It is masculine. It is third. And it is singular. Really bad writing there. And his eyes is in what? Well, since it's a possessive pronoun, it is in the genitive or possessive case, just like up above. Okay, I hope that helps you understand parsing. I did the most difficult ones I thought you would encounter, so the rest of the independent work should look and practice will hopefully be easier for you. Remember, you can go back and watch this recording at any time. Oh, and real quick, I put at the very end a challenge. If you wanted to take that last sentence and see if you could diagram it. Enjoy the rest of your day. Goodbye.